of things, and having a kind of education where there's agriculture or gardening going on in the class or in the process of the day is very important. And I'm going to go over that. I guess I'll move on to the creating a brighter future, because you're all kind of getting towards the subject of sort of doing this. Let's create this brighter future. Let's create a better education system. So, there's a science of human development. We've sort of developed an understanding of the nature of how the brain works, how the mind kind of learns, how we learn more effectively. And so linguistically speaking, this is something that's kind of common knowledge today. An infant has more capacity for learning a new language than an adult does. It's just a truthism. We all kind of intuitively know that. It's demonstrable. It's always there, right there in front of you. So linguistic experience alters phonic perception in infants by 6 months of age. So by 6 months, you start to have an effect on the brain as far as learning a new language is concerned for an infant. That's a very important thing to know, because potentially we could start to educate children at a much younger age with a secondary language, which would increase their overall intelligence by a few points according to the IQ standards. Now, a major conclusion from this research is that speech over the past 2 decades is that human listeners perceive speech quite differently from the way they perceive non-speech sounds. So that means basically if you have a television speaking, it's not going to work, because it's a non-human sound. It's not coming from a human being. Therefore, the child is not going to learn from it. It has to be from a human being that they're learning this information, especially at the infantile level. According to Janet F. Worker, previous work in which we compared English infants, English adults, and Hindi adults, and their ability to discriminate 2 pairs of Hindi non-English speech contrasts has indicated that infants discriminate speech sounds according to phonetic category without prior specific language experience, whereas adults and children as young as age of 4. So that's an important age as well, because that basically is a cutoff time if we were going to educate our infants with basically the secondary language. Yeah, they may lose this ability as a function of age and or linguistic experience. We don't know if that is true, if over the lifetime the ability to acquire a new language is lost. We just have never had an education system that utilized that information to its fullest. That's why we've never been able to really explore that. If you were to have a child raised or educated from a very young age with a secondary language, that child may be able to develop, if you were to increase the stimulus over their lifetime, that child may be able to grow to have a manifold of languages. Many different languages may be able to be utilized by that person, because they haven't allowed that muscle to atrophy, basically. So education is based on science. Developmental education is what I'm basically calling this idea. This idea that I have for a better education system is developmental education. It's using the science of development and those methods that have proven historically the most enlightening, using the trivium and quadrivium, using what we know about the cognitive development in the child. And based on Piaget's cognitive development, they are sensory motor, which is between birth and 2 years old, pre-operational, which is sort of subcategorized with symbolic and intuitive for between 2 to 7 years, and then concrete operational from 7 to 11, and formal operational from 11 to 15. Now, I'm not going to say that this all has to be done very specifically according to this, but it's a guidepost. You use that as a way to judge generally where the child's progress is going, and for virtually everyone, this is going to be a consistent thing. You're going to go through these stages, and they're described as such. Sensory motor is basically goo goo gaga, waving the hands in front of the face, kind of developing the neural pathways. Pre-operational is sort of very egocentric. Children are a child at that age is the terrible twos. You see the terrible twos, rat tantrum, everything's about them and so forth. And that is a very important age for symbolic and intuitive learning. So that's a very important stage to see. And then concrete operational is where they get the math and different things, like as a concept, that when I pour this liquid into this other container, it's the same amount of liquid, even though it looks like a smaller amount because the other container is a little bit bigger. And formal operational is basically from 11 to 15. That's what you consider to be sort of logical thinking and having sort of a mastery of knowledge, and being able to communicate with an adult as though they are an adult. So developmental education is basically a gradual and seamless transition from one stage to the next within those stages. So even within those stages, there is a gradual transition into the next stage. So it's always sort of increasing the stimulus while at the same time, different responsibilities. It's community integrated, meaning that people from the community can be employed by this system for various things, even voluntarily. For instance, things like somebody maybe is a cook at a restaurant, and he works there during the day to serve the children their food. The reason for doing that is to basically integrate the community into the education system, for one thing. Then for those people, if they become the community becomes the education system, the education system becomes the community. Once this kind of a thing can happen, you really have the possibility, the real possibility, of there being a kind of a renaissance, if you will. A very important change would occur if that were to sort of take place. So education is at the center of the community. That means that basically even certain economic factors are revolving around the education system. Because let's look at it, even in terms of how they see it today, education is an economic function of our system. That you are creating the next human resources, but instead of having that as the perspective, instead of having that they are human resources, having it as they are the next stewards of this planet. So it's important that they be well educated and understand the nature of our sort of place in the universe. That can only be instilled by a true education, not trained. That cannot be trained into a person. You can't train somebody to be wise. You cannot train someone to be wise. You have to educate them to discover that for themselves. So education in this system would begin at infancy. It would begin at infancy and it would end at death. But this is not compulsory education. A child can get out, can decide to exit the system anytime they want and re-enter it anytime they want. And so can an adult. So infancy would be, this is a sort of an overview of what infancy would be about. It's about developing the brain. At infancy, you can't instruct a child, well, this is A and B and C. A baby's not going to be able to understand that kind of information, but a baby can neurolinguistically be affected by a Spanish-speaking person speaking a language to it. That's how you would start this kind of an education. And what this does is that it does provide a service from somebody who otherwise would be in sort of a destitute situation. You have people who are Spanish speaking in this country who have very little possibility of becoming successful or having a lot of money or what we would consider to be success. This gives them the opportunity to be pulled out of poverty, essentially. And we have in America a particularly abundant amount of people who speak another language. What this does is reverse the sort of fear of these other, they took our jobs. They're going to take all of our jobs away. This is a way of providing a reason for them to exist here. It changes the whole perspective. The entire game is changed when you have these people being the new educators of infants. Now, let's bring as many as we can into this country, because then our children will be as well educated as it could possibly be. Now, I'm not advocating for a huge induction of these people. I'm just saying that it's essentially a way to sort of reverse the kind of effect that it has on our economy and on our situation. It basically elevates everyone to have this as the case. It elevates everyone to have foreign-speaking people teaching our infants. And now, granted, nobody with a criminal record. You know what I mean? There's ways that you can kind of limit what kind of people you're asking to do this for. So, teaching a second language at infancy. How can we improve our education, economy, and society all at once? That's what we're doing with that kind of an idea. So we're improving our economic, societal, and cultural sort of mindset from doing that. So yeah, childhood from 3 to 7. Childhood is sort of the once a child has, once an infant has gone to about 3 years old, they have all of the neurons that they're going to have through their life. So this is a sort of a bench post for the beginning of the next stage in evolution of their education. And it is an evolution. This is a person goes through an evolution through their lifetime. This is a facilitation, a way to sort of cultivate the evolution of that being, that person. So one subject per day in this system. You have one subject per day, meaning if you're going to learn grammar that day, you're learning grammar that entire day. But it is broken up by practical recesses. They have 1 hour subject, 1 hour recess. Now you can fluctuate the actual duration depending upon the subject. It could be 45 minutes, a half an hour of subject, and then maybe an hour of the recess, but it's based on, generally there's going to be an on and off, but one subject per day. This is improved. This is an improved version, and it actually goes along more effectively with the idea of mastery learning. This is the true form of mastery learning if you were to apply it correctly, because you have one subject. Their focus is not distracted by all these different kinds of subjects and so forth. So they have a very, they will be able to learn the subject more effectively. So the practical recesses would be things like gardening, martial arts and meditation, yoga, art, music, whatever any child is interested in, they will be sort of able to go and do that. But every one of these things is going to instill some form of discipline or community sense or just a general kind of human quality to their experience in school. It will also, more than likely, because this is going to be something that they're going to really enjoy doing, it's going to inspire them to go to school. They're going to love going to school because they actually get to do things that are fun for them instead of doing things that they're compelled to do. Yeah, that's the other thing. Developing a sense of self in other, meaning that the idea of bringing this whole community system, or bringing community into the education and having the child be a part of a community, is that you breed a sense of self in other. By that I mean love thy neighbor as thyself. That's basically what this education is trying to instill in the individual, in the student, is to love thy neighbor as thyself. Because as you go through this system, it is the community. It's not some teacher that your parents don't know. Your parents are friends with this person because they're the guy down the street, basically. This is an education system that is based in the community primarily. The practical recess part of it is, anyway. Now the teachers themselves, especially in childhood and things like that, and adolescence, they should be like professors. These people should be educating the children with the most absolutely sort of dense amount of information that they possibly can, but as well in a way that the children will be able to actually internalize it rather than memorization and regurgitation. So this is from something that I've written called Steps to Creating a Brighter Future. Steps to Creating a Brighter Future is basically an essay that goes over the different topics, specifically education, then it goes into economics or into ethics, and then education or economics. So though the mind of a child is still very underdeveloped in terms of rational thought, it makes up for it in imaginative qualities, curiosity, playfulness, and willingness to learn. But that's on the child's own terms. A child is going to best learn on his or her own terms, not from a dictated oligarchical structure from above. The fact that we have these kind of curriculums is really an atrocity to education. And thus the child must be what the first years of childhood caters to. The child must be what the education system caters to, not the child to the system. The child must be catered to, not the child catering to the system. It has to be sort of the other way around in that way. So the idea being that this system caters, okay, I already said that. So between childhood and adolescence, so understand also that though childhood education is primarily focused on developing the mind, and at this point they are, that you're developing the mind more, you're going on to grammar, you're going on to things like logic, so you're developing the mind. Well, they are still constrained by the limitations of the undeveloped brain. So you're not going to be able to just give them all of the information that you want to give them. They're going to be limited. You're not going to be able to say, well, geometrically speaking, calculus, you're not going to be able to understand it. So there's limitations to what you're going to be able to teach these children, but at the same time, you're going to be able to instill certain kinds of information to them that will be very important, like basic facts of geometry and so forth, or grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and the trivium. So this is another thing that is very important to education is unconditional positive regard. You have to teach these children you have to love these children so that they understand what love is in the first place. In order to understand love, you have to be given love. To understand respect, you have to be given respect. To understand courage, you have to go through the fear and pass through it unscathed. That's how you create. And so the idea is once these children are in the system, that they are given unconditional positive regard. The idea that some child is going to be punished for not participating in the class is absurd. And really, punishment, according to even behaviorism, doesn't work. Rewards work better in terms of sort of organizing behavior than does punishment. So at this point in adolescence, we get to adolescence. Concrete operational is the stage that they're at in terms of their development. And at that point, they will be able to start understanding things like the quadrivium. And at that point, they will start to learn mathematics as their first subject. And it will go on from there to geometry, music, and astronomy. Now, obviously, in this kind of a version, we would have available to us all of the new information that science and that sort of the razor's edge of human discovery has been able to unveil. So we have the potential to teach them far more than the children 1,000 years ago learned through the quadrivium. Potentially, we could have Einstein's and Stephen Hawking's as a standard, or maybe not as a standard, but as a relatively much larger population of people that way than we do today. That's what we need. We don't need more industrial workers. You see, originally when this plot was outlined, we didn't have as many workers. We didn't have as many of the industrial workers. Now we have too many of them. We have not enough intelligent and deliberate people in our society. We have a very few of them, and they are on the top of the pyramid or very close to it. So we have to view that as a sort of injustice and demand, or at the very least, work towards a new educational system. And I'm not saying that you must agree with what I'm saying is the case. I'm not saying that this must be the new system, but I'm giving you an advisory from my experience or from my knowledge of how education works and the history of education, what is the most effective and what is going to, not just most effective, but what will actually create a renaissance. What could potentially create a new revival of civilization and true sort of principles. So now we move on to young adulthood. That's from 11 to 18. And like I said, you could debate the actual ages between this, but that's generally what I would say is the best. So by the time students reach young adulthood, their level of involvement in their own learning has reached its completion, and that they are totally responsible for their learning. This is like a boarding school or something of that sort. The responsibility of their education is on them. They go to school because they want to, not because they're compelled to. They go because they want to learn. And because of that, the teachers are basically like librarians. They're not going to be there lecturing. They're going to be providing, facilitating the student with information rather than pushing information down their throat and expecting them to regurgitate it. The way that it would be tested for is through various basically journal log entries and essentially the actual kind of projects that they'll be creating would be essentially evaluated by the other students and by people who are sort of in the, I guess, the intellectual component of our society. It will be a public thing, sort of. It's not necessarily from a administration. Very little power will be given to that kind of aspect of the education system in terms of principles and so forth. The idea is to basically eliminate the hierarchical structure because that also sort of diminishes the willingness to learn. So in this way, education or public power. So this is the metaphor. Education is sort of the education system is sort of a metaphor for our society as a whole. And that's why it's very important for us to sort of break down the hierarchical structure. In this way, education or public power is taken from the high position of authority and given back to the students. representing the people's power. So this is a very important kind of restructuring of our system if we apply this way. Now, young adulthood continues. Basically, once a student has reached beyond adolescence and into young adulthood, the form of education that they will encounter will seem more like recess, in that they will be basically given that freedom, but also they will decide for themselves what they will learn and so forth. But one of the important things is that they will get technical training in high school. That will be their recess. Their main focus of what they're educating is they're educating themselves, but there will be recesses which will actually be practical in nature, which will be things like electric, plumbing, getting their driver's license and technical training of various sorts. Basically to make it so that they, once they complete this education, are completely independent and capable of self-sufficiency. That's the objective of this system. Once they've gone through this system from basically the the first year to the last year, they will have learned how to make a house, an entire house. Now they can obviously select to have specific things that they want to have, and this will be variable for every other place because everybody can have their own sort of subjects. But based on my suggestions right now, it's basically they can make a house. Self-sufficiency is the objective of this. That's the point of it. Not that they can make a house, but that they be self-sufficient. Whatever they need to learn to become self-sufficient is what they will be taught as a standard in this kind of a system. So adulthood, now that's from 18 until death, basically. You have the option, and like I said, this is not compulsory. You have the option to have adult education. Now at the same time, there's adult education and then there's college. Adult education is not college, based on the outline of this kind of an idea. And what I'm proposing is not just a new education system. What I'm proposing is really a new culture. That's really what I'm proposing. And the education system is just a part of that new culture. So we have free, non-compulsory, facilitated cultivation of the expansion of consciousness. And I don't mean through drugs, I mean through conversation, I mean through deliberation. This is the stuff that they used to have in Greece and Rome, for God's sakes. It's what we should have today, just for the democratic aspect of it, for people to be able to have a voice amongst one another. There should be that media, there should be that kind of a place. I would propose replacing the malls with this, basically. Use the facilities that the malls are basically made out of, and you put this kind of a system into it instead, or this kind of a atmosphere into it instead, where it's sort of a kind of a cultural hub, if you will, a place for a vector for intellectual or expansion of knowledge. And it could be considered maybe an academy of some kind, but regardless. So that's what we're doing. We're creating a new culture. So the role of college in this new culture, that would be the completely academically oriented kind of focus. It's basically you're going to have what you learn in college, but as this evolves, what kind of professors are we going to have when they've been educated from infancy to have as be as intelligent as possible through the trivium and quadrivium, to be as critical thinking as possible? These different factors, you're going to have people that are in the college professional status that are not going to be the belief-oriented scientists that we have today. They're going to be balanced with intuition and logic, with science and spirituality, because that is the true critical mindset of a person who is enlightened and has a real grasp of what's going on in the world. So, and then we also have technical trade schools and things of that sort, which will be exactly the same as it is today, learning how to create a reactor or some kind of a technologically very advanced system. I mean, honestly, I'd rather we not have nuclear power in the future, and that's kind of why this system would be beneficial, is because we would be able to look into the new technologies with a much more sort of clear mindset and be able to invent new things like the way that Tesla did and so on and so forth. He was a spiritual person, for God's sakes. He had science and spirituality. That's how he was able to do the things that he did. It wasn't because of a spark of genius that came from a school system. He was self-taught. So then towards the end, the sort of the cultural aspect of it is meritocracy and wisdom councils. Meritocracy is basically a system where you have the person is hired based on their merits, based on whether or not, how they sort of, like the quality of their, intelligence or whatever. They have to have merit to be able to have the position that they have. People in government particularly should be sort of judged in terms of, we don't have any kind of test for people who are going into government. I'm not saying that we should, but I'm saying that the people who are in government are the least among us. More often than not, we are being led by the least among us, and we need to have a way of that not to take place. So a meritocracy is an idea basically where that is the case, where you're having people who are the best qualified in the positions of power. Now, wisdom councils is a different idea entirely. It's basically where you're giving the people the power by having lottoed people that are just like a jury, lottoed in, and they are basically deciding different kinds of, should we have this highway or shouldn't we? Should we have an incinerator for our trash or shouldn't we? These kinds of ideas are decided by the people through wisdom councils. And the wisdom councils are basically a kind of, the idea has been developed by Jim Ruff, but I actually came up with certain ideas that were very similar to this, basically where you have a group of people who are average citizens in a group facilitated, and they are deliberating on an idea, and they have to come to a unanimous decision. On average, the decisions that they make are more favorable to the average population than what would be created by an expert. That's really the point of this, is that you're taking the power away from the experts and you're giving it back to the people. And so, yeah, that's, I guess, the overall view of the idea of the deliberate dumbing down of America and what we can do to develop a new culture and a new education system. That has been the history of the education system. So I'm glad you all came out, and I'm glad I was able to sort of feed you little baby birds with my pre-digested information worms. Okay. Okay, so, well, yeah, okay. Is there any questions about that part of the talk? Obviously, that's a little bit more of a sort of, this leaves room for speculation. I guess maybe what we can do is also have a group discussion, if that would be, if anybody's interested in that. It's only 3, so we have plenty of time basically to sort of do whatever.
Maybe we should all sit in a circle.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. If we're gonna do, yeah, be sit in a circle.
I was actually going to say, the fact that you mentioned Nikola Tesla.
How did you get started with all of this?
Mm-hmm.
And where do you see yourself going with it?
Well, I got started with this primarily, I mean, I kind of started researching a lot of different subjects, and this is just one of a few subjects that I've studied, basically, but it started with, well, discovering a man named Jiddu Krishnamurti sort of started me on the path of critical thinking and not taking things for just what they were, and sort of, truth has to be firsthand. You have to learn it for yourself. You can't be told truth. Truth is a pathless land. You can't get it from any specific source. You have to be a light unto yourself. Truth has to be discovered from within, just like love. So I started this primarily by researching different things. I watched this movie called the Zeitgeist movie, which was very important for my holy crap, this is actually happening kind of perspective. And then I immediately started to think about ways to solve that problem. And in searching or in trying to solve that problem, I had to research a lot of different subjects to be able to get a comprehensive and real serious knowledge of what I was talking about. So I studied the history of the education system to learn about how we could improve the education system. And so I believe that an integral part of that would be the trivium and quadrivium, as we went over logic, rhetoric, and the different subjects of math and so forth. So that's kind of how I started on this path of learning the subject of, well, not just education, but government and economics as well. And these will be subjects of further classes that I'll be giving in the future. Economics and ethics, sort of, or government in their context. So any other questions? I think this is actually on a time map. So, yeah, sure. Yeah, you go ahead.
You know, there's a few writers, you know, who are writing on this.
Sure.
And those of us who are interested are aware of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was aware of almost everyone you mentioned
Sure.
here today. How are we going to I mean, this is kind of a challenging question, but I guess the goal is really to reach the masses.
Mhm.
How are we going to do that, you know, when these other writers, you know, the influence of their work has only
Sure.
gone so far?
Sure. Well, I think that the answer lies in first doing something like what I'm doing right now. You have to first study the information yourself and then teach it to other people. We need to really, it has to be a grassroots thing. You can't expect for the revolution to be televised, but at the same time, if more and more people were to create media where they're exposing these truths and then trying to sort of use the current technological age to their advantage, be able to send that message far and wide. The idea, though, is primarily to convince people or to make them understand that this system that we're living under today is not in our best interest, and that a better system can be created using what we know about history, using what we know about the human brain, which I will be explaining in this part of the talk. So it's really important that we understand the sort of where education has been coming from, and from learning that we can kind of judo that and throw it out of the way kind of with its own energy. And a lot of the benefits of this, and one of the things that I really would like to say is that I'm not dogging the education system just to dog it. Okay, I'm not, you know, it's important that we look at it, examine it, see through it, see that it is, see its failures and its shortcomings, and from there modify it. But we have today a very sophisticated system that if we were to use what available resources we have, we could create a much better system than if we didn't have any of those resources. We have potentially a springboard that we can use to jump in a kind of way of quantum leap to the next level. We have that potential in our times right now to quantum leap into a new sort of, and it's going to be different looking. It's not going to look like our current methods of education, but it will be successful. It will work. It will make enlightened, intelligent, critical thinking people, and it will do it with much more success, much more quickly than our current state of what we do. We really kind of have the system backwards or upside down. We train our students to be, or we train our students or give them the most information in college at the later time in their life, when really we should be starting at the younger age. We should be starting education in a much more sophisticated way at a much younger age than we do. Matt has a question. I don't know if you want to.
You got it stuck.
There you go.
I was actually just going to add on kind of to what you were saying, and I think from the grassroots level, one of the things that can be done is making an influence through charter schools.
Yeah.
Starting your own kind of branch of, you know, a charter school based on these liberal arts principles and critical thinking, and you know, that's not just centered around, you know, the lower standards and the Common Core crap. And you know, I'm sure, I don't know if you've looked into it, if there's any schools around here actually already kind of on that path.
Yeah.
But I'm sure, you know, as this becomes, you know, as more people look into these kinds of things and, you know, hopefully come to the same conclusions, which I mean, I know many people have, this kind of idea to start these schools will become more commonplace, and perhaps then they can link together to become more of a network. And you know, there needs to be coverage of that too. And that message needs to get out there. And we need people who are sophisticated and or know how to use the sophisticated media technologies to kind of get these messages out there, almost in the same fashion that they use the propaganda against us. I feel like that weapon can be used to transform things for the better.
It can be used basically like a gardening tool instead of as a weapon. There is an idea that I have for this local area, actually, with the old Carroll Garden Center could be transformed into an education facility where we could have agricultural and various volunteer projects being done there. At least it's to start, it would be a volunteer project just to sort of refurbish it, appraise it. The facility there is sort of dilapidated. It's been abandoned for several years. But it could be used as a facility eventually, and I think as far as a community-oriented project, it'd be very beneficial, and that would also sort of inspire the eventual transformation into a more well, it would propagate the idea. It would be effective in transmitting this idea. If you actually had a thing that was going on somewhere where you're applying these principles, you know, and so I plan on doing that in the relative future, working on that kind of a project. I have a friend of mine who's interested, and we're gonna pursue that. Are there any other questions? Sure.
I became aware about a charter school in the Baltimore area, and I didn't visit it,
Mm-hmm.
but it was, you know, more freedom and creativity. It was for younger children.
Sure. Is that the Montessori?
No,
No.
it was a charter school. I forget right now. It was a little while ago, and I just didn't go down there.
This has the internet, but-
Roots and branches or something like that.
Mhm.
Trunk and branches.
And one of the things that's very important, and one of the messages that's in this, this book here, The Last Child in the Woods, which is a very important book to sort of know about as far as it goes over saving our children from nature deficit disorder. We have in our current day and age basically a sort of an avoidance of, and maybe even a denial of nature as far as, you know, let's have children go out into the forest and play or something. And that actually has been shown to lower the rates of things like ADHD and ADD. Because when they have unstructured play in nature, they tend to get all their energy out, and they have afterwards a little bit more of ability to focus and have attention. So,
But I think it's kind of fitting that you said him instead of Edison, because it shows more how Nikola Tesla actually did good things to try to help people and actually better people in society, rather than Edison with his more corporate style.
right. Thomas Edison was not an inventor, really. He was sort of a more of a businessman than anything else. He was very good at the idea of patenting, and he was very effective at making stuff that people would want to buy. And he was also very good at sort of propaganda too, because he killed an elephant with Tesla's electrical, what is it, DC or AC? Anyway, he killed an elephant with that, and he basically said that it's unsafe. But he did it in sort of he did it sort of like, you know, it's not really fair what he did, basically, to Tesla. And you don't, not only Edison, but also this kind of comes back into the modern age through banking and everything, but Tesla was actually ruined by his labs and all, his lab and all of his research had been burned by, what was his name? It's one of the bankers. J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan was one of his bigger funders. He said, "You're not making stuff that can be profitable? I'm going to burn your stuff." That's what he ended up doing. Is he burned all of his experiments. A lot of the papers were taken by the I think the FBI or something of that sort. So a lot of or maybe from the business end of things. So yes, Tesla sort of represents the integration of science and spirituality and what can be accomplished by sort of understanding the nature of reality from a more kind of, supernatural perspective, and then also the natural perspective through science. And supernatural and natural aren't necessarily different. It's just, we don't have a model of reality yet that can actually encompass all of that. But that's ultimately what a very good theory of everything has to include, is the paranormal. Because really, in a model of reality that is all-encompassing, that's just normal. There is no paranormal. A theory of everything has to be able to explain everything. But unfortunately, none of our current theories of everything, including those that Einstein proposed and various people even today, they don't cover consciousness. Consciousness is a problem in the current model of science and reality. And because of that, we have the idea that basically our children can be a slave, a human resource, instead of them being basically an incarnation of the divine. And that is really what is sort of at the heart of our problem in terms of it being allowed to get this far from sanity. And that's what it is. This is moral insanity being carried out on a daily basis. The reduction of the intelligence of the population isn't just from the education system. It's from what we eat, what we drink, what we take as far as pharmaceuticals, everything. Everything. It's a comprehensive, full spectrum assault on your brain and on your body is what we're going on, what is taking place in the modern world. And we, as a people, just like in previous times, you know, there were the slave class and everything, but today it's basically the entire population is a slave class. We need a plebeian revolt. We need to have a plebeian revolt. And it has to be done with a jubilee to eliminate all of the sort of debts that have happened in the past century. Because when we recognize that the Federal Reserve is basically a cabal, a Ponzi scheme, that's a deceit. That is a major sort of a thing. Erase that history, have a jubilee, have a plebeian revolt, and institute new systems that can actually provide for the future security and safety, or future security and happiness of we the people. Can't be said enough times. So, any other questions? Any comments? I think we can group discussion maybe. Okay.
So I went, you know. And I came here today because you're offering something. But the question is, how do we spread it, in my mind? You know, how do we really start getting more and more people involved? And I guess from my own perspective, I am interested in writing and speaking on these topics. But a problem for me has been, where are the people to talk about it? Where's your moral, your social, your emotional support system?
Sure.
You know, to pursue these things. Which is why I came by today.
Okay. Well, my idea for how to sort of transmit these ideas was to put it on a camera, to eventually put it on TV. So I also plan on putting it on the internet. This information can then be shared with potentially thousands of people, whatever. So that's sort of basically how I'm starting. Yes, using the internet. And using the internet is going to be a very vital aspect of spreading this kind of information, but it shouldn't be the only method. Using the internet is a very great tool, but if you just use the internet, you're going to fail, because you have to get people to actually come out and be a part of the activity of this knowledge practice.
Something that I've noticed, you know, and I'm sure many of us have noticed, is that, you know, the attention span of most Americans is this long. So a lot of people are going to take the time to sit through an entire 2-hour, 1-hour lecture on different things like this that are, you know, to people that are genuinely interested in, they are always seeking new information. So, I mean, as much as I don't really like the idea of using like these little tiny snippets, like the sound bite, because that's like instant gratification, kind of, you know, it's not teaching you to constantly seek truth, it's teaching you that truth is found in like these instant gratification bites of reality. I do think that there could be some merit, though, into doing things that are like, you know, little tiny videos that are like like 1 or 2 minutes long, that really just kind of are hard-hitting, like make you laugh, make you angry, make you something, you know, that invoke an emotional response that lets you remember what that was all about. That's well done. Like, have you ever, you know of a Jason Silva?
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say.
That guy and his, like, he calls it philosophical shots of espresso, which is kind of a cool idea, I think, because he just takes these, like,
they're
really
viral. They're very viral, very short clips of very inspirational concepts, and just, he's sort of a transhumanist.
Yeah. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I'm not going to dog him just for being a transhumanist. He's inspired by where we're headed in technology.
He definitely has a lot of cool ideas. I think sometimes he goes a little overboard with some of the transhumanist
I think he is
things,
sort of the new version of Timothy Leary. In terms of their kind of being, you know, he was a sort of an agent. You know what I mean? College is a scouting program, man. These people go through college, they become very intellectual, very, very profound people, but they're turned to the dark side, if you will.
Yeah, that does happen a lot.
Terence McKenna, a lot of people. So you have to be able to appreciate what they're saying without taking it and being like, I believe this 100%. Just like how Aristotle said, you have to be able to learn something and entertain it in your mind without believing it 100%, or you know. So it's very important that we kind of do that for ourselves. Yes, Jason Silva has a very good outline for how to propagate knowledge. What knowledge he is spreading is good, it's vital, but how he's saying it is sort of, it's with this, he has this enthusiasm for the subject, but the subject is usually something that's kind of like, well, you know, and it has dubious.
Well, some of them, depends.
Some of them,
Because
yeah,
I
some of
definitely
them.
think that he has some pretty good videos that make you think about
They do.
That make you think about your life, what you're doing, where we're heading as
Yeah.
a species. Like, he definitely
Right.
ponders these
So that's sort of
existential ideas a lot, which I like about it, because it definitely inspires me to look more into these kinds of ideas and to look into myself to find my own answers, instead of just kind of, you know, like our education system teaches us to consistently regurgitate what we've been told,
Right.
you know.
Right, and he does give that kind of a thing about, you know, think for yourself. But at the same time, you know, there is the idea of the technique to use the truth against people.
Yeah, that's true.
So it could be that. Now I'm not saying that it is, but it could be that kind of his message, very inspirational, very, you know, well developed. But you know, I'm just kind of skeptical about it. You know.
Healthy dose of skepticism is
Yeah.
always a good thing.
And that's what we need more of in our times. And you were gonna.
Well, several things I would like to hear from you. What's everybody's name? And what's your name again?
Matt.
Matt? And you're? Carol. I mean, you know, everybody should be talking. We should, you know, kind of calm ourselves down. Us
Sure.
who can just run off the handle with all of this so quickly.
Well, I mean, I guess we could start with maybe like your experience in the education system. What was your sort of experience with education? Did you have a positive or negative experience? You know, when did you you know?
Just go around in a circle. You start with you.
Okay. Well, I actually did a speech on this. This was my first speech in Toastmasters. And in Toastmasters, I only did 3 speeches because they have a program. And they won't go outside their program, and it's kind of limited. And they're not speaking on relevant social issues enough, you know, in my mind. You know, so I'm interested in learning to speak. But, you know, they were just so limited in their scope there. And then more like everything's okay. It was more like talking about, you know, what do we do in the workplace, you know, how do we improve our skills, as opposed to how do we change the whole of it. But so
Actually
anyway,
gotta
my
do
first
this.
speech was about what my experience was like, and, you know, we didn't get to speak, you know, in the educational system, you know, which for me, you know, turns out to be a big problem, you know. Like just what you're saying, the teacher's in the front of the room, and we all have to listen and follow along. That's not much of an education.
Right.
So, you know, later on, you know, as I got older, you know, I was afforded a few good speaking, you know, experiences. But that happened much later in life, very few and far between, when it should be like, you know, you mentioned education and the community, and everybody really speaking and interacting all the time from our hearts and souls. Next. I'm going to run to the ladies.
Okay, sure.
I'm here for one reason. Patrick is my youngest stepson. I'm here to support him and hear what y'all got to say. And as far as education, when I came through school, some of what he was talking about up there is what I had in school, and I don't know where it took off, left somewhere. Driver's education, technical skills, and I mean, all of that was taught when I was in school, I just don't know where it hung a left turn at. Driver's education, I mean, it was all taught. And now listening to y'all, you know, and the saying with Patrick, driver's education is apparently not taught no more. You know, it just flips me out, because that was all part of a young person's life, man. You couldn't wait to get your license. It was like the next stepping stone in life. And today it just seems so totally different, you know. So, next.
All right, well, my name's Matt, and personally, I've had mixed experiences with both, you know, primary, secondary, and higher education. You know, throughout the years, I've had many different teachers, some of whom, you know, I attribute a lot of my perspective to because they helped show me some things that I was lacking in, and other teachers were just kind of regurgitating the status quo, you know. And I think that is one of the most fundamental parts of, you know, the way our education system is now. It comes down to, what do the teachers do in the classroom? How do they facilitate the classroom setting, and how do they facilitate the discussion, and are they just, you know, lecturing to people and saying this is the way it is, and if you don't agree then you're wrong and you fail the class? Or are they encouraging people to question the information and things of that sort? And then in college, you know, I've had kind of the same results. Some professors I've had were pretty close-minded. Again, kind of just speaking in behalf of the status quo, the way things are, defending the status quo. Others more content to challenge the status quo, to encourage others to think outside the box, and to challenge the status quo. But also, I feel that in college, once you get out of high school, and in college in this system, you know, there's, depending on what you do with it and your intentions, like if you're just kind of going along with the big machine, you know, that's what we've been taught to do, and that's, you know, it's understandable to see people doing that. I'm not sitting here trying to condemn them or anything. However, we need to realize that there needs to be a change of pace, and, you know, I think that college can be used, if you go within it, to learn the necessary skill sets to be able to, you know, to learn some of these technical skills. Like, I'm going into communication studies. I want to learn more about communicating these kinds of ideas to larger groups of people, and using the various forms of sophisticated media technologies to get these ideas out there. So in that respect, I think on a practical level, college can be useful, but for some of this historical, ethical, philosophical, and principle-based information based on which we kind of found our belief systems and our society's bedrock foundation, I think a lot of that is lacking, because it's kind of regurgitating the same thing that we've been seeing, the industrial mindset to keep the big machine going, so to speak, as opposed to trying to teach us how to liberate ourselves and to think for ourselves. So that's my spiel.
I'm Kara. During high school, I really started observing the types of teachers that I had, and there's really just two different types of teachers I had. I had teachers that loved what they were doing, and then I had what I like to call Cornell teachers, teachers that would sit you down with your textbook, not speak a word to you, and make you Cornell note everything that was in your textbook. Per chapter, yeah. Yes, I'm 22. And they made us Cornell our notebooks, and after that, our tests came off of our notes, and if our notes weren't up to par, then we didn't do something right. And I don't think teaching should be done that way. Most of the classes that I got very good grades in were more critical thinking classes than just regurgitating information. Like, I can't memorize anything to save my life. So math was always a problem for me, and but I excelled with English, and I excelled in the arts department and liberal arts and things like that. But I always had those few teachers that really were passionate about what they were teaching that I could learn a lot from, especially my English teachers. Most of them very much love their job and love to do what they do. But for the most part, the education system is a lot different now. I actually went to a couple of meetings with the Board of Education. I went to Hereford High School, and they were it's the last agricultural high school in Maryland, and they are actually switching over to Common Core next year. And my sister is a junior, well, she'll be a junior senior there next year. And we actually went and we signed petitions for them to exclude Common Core, because the way that my high school was set up was you had 4 classes a day, and an hour between, it's called enrichment, which is basically a study hall, and your lunch. And in that hour was when you got to do what you needed to do, but you had 4 classes all day, and they were about 90 minutes apiece, and that really broke down the subjects for you, and you only had them for a semester, and then you switched to a second set of classes. What Common Core wants you to do is AB days, 8 classes a day. Which doesn't help your students at all. You have 8 classes. If one teacher can't teach all 8 subjects, why is one student supposed to absorb all 8 subjects in one day? It doesn't work like that. So we did a couple of petitions. We went to the Board of Education. Every single high school teacher and parent and alumnus from my high school actually went and protested at the Board of Education. And the superintendent still instilled the Common Core. So it really goes to show exactly it's all about money these days, even in our education system. The superintendent gets paid a lot of money to instill these certain things, regardless of what the people actually want.